Good morning. My name is Eva Wiener, and I'm here to talk about my experiences during World War II, known as the Holocaust. For a long time, I never thought myself as a survivor of the Holocaust because I did not have any of the signals that would indicate that I was a survivor. I didn't have a number on my arm. I was not in a concentration camp. I wasn't a hidden child, or many other scenarios that would define a survivor. But I did change my mind when I decided that I was part of history that was important and needed to be told. Both my parents were born in Poland, and during the early 1900s, there was an uprising against the Jewish people in many of the Polish towns, where the police and military would pick on Jewish people and commit terrible crimes against them. So many Jews in Poland decided to leave and find a safer haven. Both my parents left with their families when they were children and traveled through Europe, both ending up in Berlin, Germany. Berlin was the capital, and it was a very welcoming city, very progressive. It had very culturally advanced programs, many colleges and universities, museums and theaters, and it welcomed the Jewish community, and they were able to live and thrive in Berlin. My father's family, he was one of 8, had a very large bakery, and all the children worked in the bakery, as was customary at the time. My mother was one of 4, and both of them were able to go to public school and lived fairly comfortably. Then something happened in 1933 when a man by the name of Adolf Hitler became chancellor, or president, sort of, in Germany, and he instituted some laws. And the laws were basically against the Jewish population. By the time my parents met, things in Berlin were very difficult. And many Jews, seeing the problems, decided to leave Germany and find other places to be. My father's mother, father, a brother, and 3 sisters saw what was going on and were very unhappy. And they decided to leave, and they went to a place called Palestine. By the time my parents met, things in Berlin were very difficult, and Germany was not a welcoming place for Jews anymore. My father's parents, brother, and 3 sisters decided to leave Germany. Life in Berlin and life in Germany in general was very difficult for Jews. So my father's parents, a brother, and 3 sisters left Germany and went to a place called Palestine, which is now the state of Israel. My mother was one of 4, and they did not feel that they wanted to run away. But something happened in November of 1938, known as Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, which was basically the beginning of World War II. It's called the Night of Broken Glass because at that time, that evening, the military and the police marched through the streets of Germany and smashed the windows of all the businesses that belonged to Jews, destroying synagogues, burning their holy books. And it was a night of turmoil. The following day, my father was taken out of the apartment that we lived in and put on a train and sent back to what they called the country of origin. Since he was born in Poland, they were sending all these men on the train back to Warsaw, where they were going to be confined. Now, he found himself in Warsaw in a one-bedroom apartment, sharing it with 12 other men. That not being his only problem. The problem was he left my mother and me, his baby, back in Berlin and not knowing what our fate was going to be. Of course, life in Poland was very difficult, and it became very difficult for my mother as well in Berlin. She and her two sisters started standing on lines of every consulate and embassy that found itself in Berlin. They were begging and pleading with every country in the world to issue them what was called a visa, or permit to leave the country and enter another country. They would stand on lines, sometimes days on end, begging any country to issue a visa. My mother was delighted. She was able to obtain a visa to a place called Siam. That's now the country of Thailand. Not a very modern country, what we call a third world country. Very little modern culture, very little indoor plumbing, and a very backward kind of country. But that didn't matter. Now she had proof that she was going to be welcomed by another country because she had the visa. So she registered it with the police station, and then my father was able to start making his way back to Germany, but on the condition that as soon as he arrived, they would make arrangements to leave immediately. In the meantime, my mother had also sent money to her brother, who had gone to Havana, Cuba. She sent him money asking him if he could purchase a visa to Cuba. While my father was traveling back from Warsaw to Berlin, the visa came for Havana, Cuba, for Cuba. And my mother was delighted because there was not a big decision to make whether to choose to go to Siam, where we knew no one and was a very backward country, or go to a place like Havana, Cuba, which was a very modern vacation destination island and only 90 miles off the coast of Florida, which ultimately was their goal, hopefully to get to America. My father came back to Berlin. They packed what few belongings they were permitted to take, only one suitcase per person. And my mother was able to book passage on a ship called the MS St. Louis, owned by the Hamburg America line. And we boarded a train for Hamburg, Germany. When we get to the dock in Hamburg, there's this gorgeous, magnificent cruise ship sitting on the dock. And there were banners flying and a band playing and photographers running around taking pictures of everybody. It was very exciting. And the headlines in the newspaper reported our departure by saying 937 Jewish passengers leave Germany, headed for Havana, Cuba. Good riddance, glad to see them go. We're not happy to have Jews in Germany anyway, so let them go to another place, anywhere but Germany. So these 900 Jewish passengers boarded the ship, headed for magnificent Havana, Cuba. And the cruise was beautiful. There were dances and parties and movies, and it was a true cruise ship, just like if anybody's ever been on a cruise knows, it's very luxurious. And this trip to Cuba was the same. We were treated very royally. As soon as we get to Havana, Cuba, we put our luggage out, getting ready to leave the ship, but we're not docking. They're not allowing the ship to come to the port. All of a sudden, everybody was panicked. What are they doing? Why can't we get off the ship? And all of a sudden, there's negotiations going on. A little boat comes out to the ship, and the captain is having this meeting with all these big, important people. And the next day, we're still not getting off the ship. So then the captain gets on the boat, and he goes to the dock, and he comes back. And it's reported that we are not going to be permitted to get off the ship. Everybody's panicking. They formed a passenger committee trying to find a resolution to our problem. You have to understand that many of the passengers were very, very prominent people. We had doctors and lawyers and college professors. And none of us were paupers. We were not poor people. We paid high price, number one, for the visa that we had. That was expensive. And the passage on the ship was very expensive. So that none of us would have been a burden to anybody if we came to any country. But begging and pleading with all the countries in the world was to no avail. There's all this negotiation going on, but nothing is happening. The passengers even talked about a mutiny. They wanted to take over the ship and demand to be allowed to get off. But the captain convinced us that he would do everything in his power not to bring us back to Germany, because he knew that if we came back to Germany, we would not survive. Our plight was decided. And the captain, who had no affiliation with the Nazi regime, was adamant about saving his passengers and not allowing them to be taken and have a problem by going back to Germany. He promised the passengers. My mother remembers him making an announcement over the public address system, promising that he would do anything in his power rather than bring the ship back to Germany with the passengers. He would beach the ship anywhere, just not to bring us back to what our fate was going to be. Then he decided, we're only 90 miles away from America. Surely they will let us land in Miami. So he turned the ship around and headed towards Miami. But when we got so close to Miami, my father used to say, we were so close we could almost read the license plates on the taxis on Ocean Avenue, and all the palm trees and the beautiful hotels and everything was so enticing. But the minute that happened, the Coast Guard from the United States chased us away. They threw us out of American waters because they were afraid that maybe somebody might jump ship and try to swim ashore. They refused to take us to the port. Even a telegram sent to President Roosevelt got no answer. The captain had no choice, but we left America. And he had to head back towards Europe, but still contacting every country in the world, begging, pleading, asking any country to take our 900 passengers. By the time we got back to Europe, Fortunately, 4 countries agreed to take some of the passengers. No one country said, I'll take them all. After all, it's only 900 people. But they decided that 4 countries would divide up the passenger list and each take some. So Belgium, Holland, France, and England agreed to take some of the passengers. My father, in his extreme wisdom, asked to be placed on the list to depart to England. Many years later, I asked my father why he decided on England. After all, he didn't know anybody in the other countries or England. But he had a sister who was living in Belgium. Why didn't you choose to go to Belgium, Dad? Well, he decided he wanted to get as far away from Germany as possible. And England was the furthest away. And he was hoping that the English Channel would be a buffer against Germany, and that we would probably be there. Little did he know that of the 4 countries that agreed to take passengers, only England would be the safest haven. England was the only country that was able to fight against Germany and the Nazi regime, because Belgium, Holland, and France were invaded by the Nazi troops within weeks and months. And the aunt that met us on the dock in Antwerp, she and her husband and their baby greeted us when the ship docked. But unfortunately, their fate was also that they were not safe in Belgium. Eventually, all of them died in Auschwitz concentration camp. So now we were able to go to England, thank goodness. We took a little tender from Belgium to Liverpool, England, and landed in London. We spent the entire war in London, being bombed many times, having to move several times because our homes were destroyed by Nazi bombs. But life in England was the best of all 3, because had I gone to any of the other countries, I probably would not have survived. Living in England was difficult. The war was very, very hard on the British. We spent many, many hours, sometimes days, in bomb shelters. Bomb shelters that really would not protect us against a bomb, but only about the fall of debris as a result of the bomb. That's about the only protection that we had. And bomb shelters, which were supposed to house about 50 people, used to cram in about 200, and was very difficult. But my life would have been so much worse in Belgium, Holland, and France. So I'm grateful that I was able to be in England. And I survived the war with my parents and came to America after the war. We came to America in 1946, 1 year after the war ended. And we landed by ship in New York Harbor on Memorial Day weekend, where unfortunately there was a dock strike, which was very common in those days. And the dock strike meant that we had no dock workers to take our luggage off the ship. So we were not able to get off the ship. And it was a little frightening because it was almost like reliving our time in Havana Harbor. But fortunately, after the weekend was over, the strike was ended and we were able to get off the ship. One of my aunts settled in Queens, New York, my mother's sister, and my mother's other sister found herself in Belmar, New Jersey, because that's where she had in-laws who supported her in her arrival to America. So I spent the first summer in Belmar, New Jersey, going to the beach for the first time, seeing the ocean from the beach, and learning how to swim in the ocean, and it was wonderful. But then we lived in Queens, New York, near my other aunt, because my father found work there. Because he was trained as a baker as a child in Berlin, he was able to find work as a baker. But learning English, getting accustomed to new countries, was a difficult time for both my parents. I managed to grow up in Queens, New York, but I married a man from Belmar and therefore moved to the Jersey Shore when I got married. I lived in Long Branch and in Ocean Township, New Jersey, and had two beautiful daughters, one of whom is married and has given me two beautiful grandchildren, and my other daughter who is single and says she's happy that way. I changed my mind about defining myself as a Holocaust survivor when a book called Voyage of the Damned was published. I realized that my parents and I were part of history that would become the precursor, the entrance to the Holocaust. The ship was selected to show the world that nobody cared what happened to the Jewish people, and that the Nazi government was going to take care of that for the world and eliminating the Jews. What they had done was they infiltrated the government of President Bru, the president of Cuba, and told him that he will not allow us to disembark. And he didn't have a problem with that because he, being very corrupt, realized that our visas, which were very expensive, the profit for it went into the pocket of one of his arch rivals. And he didn't see any profit from that. And he didn't care whether the Jews came to Cuba or not. So he had no problem in refusing us entry. But it also showed that the rest of the world really didn't care either, because America refused us, Canada refused us, and all the other countries that were contacted had said no to allowing us entry. So here was a ship with 900 plus passengers. Simply because the passengers were Jews, were not allowed entry to any country. And this was evident by the headlines that read the day we got to Cuba. Headlines in Germany read, "Jews not permitted entry." Here is the whole world turning their backs on the Jews. We'll take care of them. We'll get rid of them for you. So now I was part of this terrible event in history. Simply because the Jews were hated, there was bigotry, anti-Semitism, prejudice, that all led to what the Nazis were going to do to the Jewish people. But it wouldn't stop with the Jews. It never does. Others were selected as well as not being good enough to be part of society. If you believed in a different religion, Jehovah's Witness, or Roma, Gypsies, Catholic priests, anyone that differed, anyone that opposed the ideals of the Nazi philosophy were to be eliminated. And anyone that was physically disabled would be eliminated as well. And only hate and bigotry and prejudice, anti-Semitism, is what led to this catastrophe, where 11 million people, not men with guns and rifles, not people in uniform, 11 million civilians, ordinary people. And each one of them, each of those people had a mother and a father, a sister, brother, cousins, aunts, and uncles. They were individual people, simply because they were different, were picked to be eliminated. This can never, never happen again. Even though it is happening in other places and at other times, even in current times. Genocides are still occurring today, where simply because someone is different, or thinks differently, or believes differently, should be eliminated. And all of us, in everyday life, must stand up against this tyranny. When each of us sees an injustice, it's time to stand up and not be a bystander and think someone else is going to do something, but stand up against all the hate and bigotry in the world. So I give my students, and I will give you the same homework assignment. We survivors are not going to be here much longer by virtue of our age. Who is going to tell the story? Your homework assignment doesn't have to be completed for 20 years. But I need your response and promise that you will fulfill this homework assignment. And that is to pass the word on to the next generation, to your brothers and sisters, and then your children and grandchildren, about a calamity that occurred that should never be done again. No one should be discriminated against simply because of the religion they believe in, the way they look, the way they think. And we must continue to fight hate and bigotry forever. That basically is my story. But children usually ask several questions. So I'll try to remember some of the questions they ask and answer them for you. The first question I'm always asked is, what happened to the captain? And that's an important question. Because my mother used to say that the captain was our savior. And in fact, the passengers of the St. Louis that survived had him memorialized at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, as a righteous among the nations, because he believed that it was unjust to persecute Jews. And he was the one who basically made us able to go to another country. Unfortunately, he lived all his life in poverty. And when the St. Louis survivors realized that he was poor, After the war, they sustained him and kept him alive and well for his entire rest of his life, and then honored him by finding him among the righteous in Jerusalem. We are grateful, and I was privileged to be able to pay honor to him in person at his nameplate in Jerusalem 2 years ago with 5 other survivors of the St. Louis, where we honored his memory. And the reason it's so important to talk about him is that here is one man, one person, who actually changed the lives and saved the lives of 900 passengers. What one person can do is important, and each of you and each of us are responsible for helping those that cannot help themselves. Another question is asked about how I feel about coming to America after being turned away. It's an interesting question, because when I came to America in 1946, I looked forward not only to coming to my family, because I had no one in England. We came to family in America, firstly, and I was coming to what was called a free country, where now I was able to observe my religion, become educated, find a way of earning a living, and living in a free country. But the message of the Holocaust is so vitally important so that we do not live it again.